Welcome to Valley Viewpoint. I'm Roger Johnson. My guest is Suzan Logan. She is a clinical social worker and counselor, and she is my guest today, and we're discussing, both of us have read this book, The Aging Brain by Dr. Timothy Jennings. He has written this book partly due to his mother-in-law, who is suffering the effects of the aging brain. The subheading of this book is Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind. Welcome, Suzan, to Valley Viewpoint.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to just reminisce about how we met. Generally speaking, I would trace that back to the gym here at Walla Walla University. And you were known to keep the treadmill elevated quite high. And you indicated to me that you're preparing to walk and enjoy the Rocky Mountains when your son, I believe, was in Colorado. And from then on, I became more aware of your counseling. And I thought that since I was so thrilled about this book by Dr. Jennings, that I thought I would share it with you. And you're willing to come on the set and give your reactions to this book as a counselor and as a human being we're all trying to keep this brain from aging too fast. So what was your reaction when I invited you to take a look at this book too?
Well, I had not heard of this author, Tim Jennings, prior to that. But the title was intriguing to me, The Aging Brain. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I'd like to see what he has to say about it. And then when you gave me a copy and I looked at it, and I saw that he's a psychiatrist and a psychopharmacologist, he sounded very knowledgeable about the subject. And so I thought, well, that sounds really good. And then I started reading it, and oh my sakes, every chapter has so many footnotes, some over 100. And he's done this research amazingly well. And so I was very, very interested to hear all that he had to say in this book.
So your initial reaction, especially as a person trained to look at materials, you were impressed with the documentation, obviously, when you
Yes.
read 100 and some chapters. And that is very, very a large amount of work that has been put into this book. What is a relationship between a counselor in your career and a psychiatrist? Talk to us about even this area. Just kind of give us a world of counselors in this area and what psychiatrists do. Are they hopefully cooperative, I would think, or tell us about that?
Well, psychiatrists were in the same field. Psychiatrists, the one thing that they can do that I cannot do is they can prescribe medication. And oftentimes that's needed for certain kinds of mental situations. For example, sometimes when people are depressed, they are so depressed that they need some medication so they can get a little less depressed so they can actually do some work. So they can actually do talk therapy.
They can actually get to your office, for example.
Right.
And I've heard that when people are very depressed, to get out of bed is a major event in their lives. And
yeah, for severe depression, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And psychiatrists are, and oftentimes when there's inpatient places where people can go when they're very, very ill, mentally ill, psychiatrists are usually always the head of that department, and they often manage the whole program. They would have people like myself, a clinical social worker. They would have, psychiatric nurses. They would have other people there working with them.
I see.
But they often run the whole program, and so they're wonderful to have, and they know the most about medication. And even though any MD can prescribe psychiatric medication, psychiatrists are much more knowledgeable because that's their particular emphasis.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Suzan, because I certainly have heard that a GP, a family practice, they can dispense medications, and in this area of depression especially, they can prescribe but a psychiatrist who is definitely the specialty when it comes to those issues of any medication that affects the brain.
Yes, yes.
And so a person, like you say, you would be, for example, working under a psychiatrist oftentimes, or you could be independent.
In an inpatient setting, certainly, or I could be independent as well. Now I'm working for a clinic. It's a Christian-based Good Samaritan Ministries is where I work now, and it's a Christian-based counseling center where I provide treatment to clients that come in.
I'm glad that you also mentioned that, because I noticed that this book highly emphasizes the Christian emphasis of belief systems and how important that is. I first became aware of this book when I looked at the back page of a very prominent magazine that I've subscribed to for years. It was Christianity Today.
Oh, that's where you saw it.
And I had read his previous books, The God-Shaped Heart, The God-Shaped Brain, but then I saw that in the back of Christianity Today, the whole back page was this, this book and his
really?
advertising. And I said, this did not happen by accident. I mean, this is not just a small ad in a magazine. This is major. And so I had some high expectations, and it didn't disappoint me.
Didn't disappoint me either. I thought it was fascinating. In fact, the very beginning of the book, if you want to start going through it.
I'd love to,
okay.
Yes.
The very beginning talks about, oh my, if you were a biologist, I think you would really understand it probably a lot better than I did to start out with.
I'm not a biologist, so we're both groping at, I thought it was very candid of him to let us know that his mother-in-law is suffering to the point where he has seen such contrast that for the sake of his wife and for the sake of others, he's dedicated this to his wife, and then her mother is the one that has prompted this book.
Yeah, that was very touching.
Yes, very touching.
Because I know those of us who do have family with severe dementia, including Alzheimer's, of course, in our family, it's of concern.
Yeah.
It is of great concern. And I was particularly interested in his introduction that mentioned his mother-in-law, and how painful that was for his wife.
Yeah.
And I thought of clients that I've seen in situations like this.
Yes.
And I thought of my own family, that there's dementia in the family. So I thought, anything that I can figure out, that I can learn to do better or different, I would sure like that for myself as well. So I was really looking to this to see.
And I would include myself in that as well, where my mother also was diagnosed with dementia and died with that condition. So when you mention in your own family, I could identify with his mother-in-law and with family members, as you say, Susan, with his condition. So how do we prevent it? And that's the rest of the book.
It's really interesting. I'll just look down here at my notes and some of the things that and he talks about what he's recommending here and all the research that he's done with all these scores and scores of footnotes that I've talked about. He talks about how people who there's some predisposition to dementia, to your mind not working that well. And he gives a number of different examples of that, and some of those things you don't have any control over. But he always goes on to say, even if that's been the case in your situation, you can do things now to make it different. And there's a lot of things that we can do now. And we can do now, like you and I, who are through with our childbearing years, people who haven't had kids yet, they can do things different and make the genes that they pass on to their kids in better shape. And I had no idea that you could, things that you do in your life, change your genes so that it's harder for your kids, or change your genes so it's better for your kids. And
that long word that he defines in the book, epigenetics.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and I believe I first heard about epigenetics on Nova several years ago, and it just blew my mind.
It's
about how what we do in our life will affect my grandchild, and especially, of course, it's too late for me. In other words, but through my child, and then through her children, and through her children, what I do in my life does affect them.
Yeah, that's really epigenetics. And he said the way he described it was how our genes are expressed. I mean, we have the same kind of genes, but they're expressed in different ways, depending on our lifestyle.
Since we're talking about the genes, I was especially wanting to focus in, because I had read another book, The End of Alzheimer's by Bredesen, Dr. Bredesen, who's referenced in this book a bit. And in that book, it was highly suggested that we get tested, genetic testing. And that was a threshold that I haven't done. And I don't know if you have. I haven't asked you. But this particular gene, did you notice this particular gene? This is on page 182. We were talking about the good news. The APOE4. It is, if you have one of those in your genes, you're 14% increased risk, or I should say 14% of the people have that gene. And if you have two copies, you're 10 to 30 times more at risk. But then I love this on page 182. But the good news is that it's not necessary that you take on Alzheimer's. It is the good news is that it is neither necessary nor sufficient on its own to cause the disease. And that's what I sense that you were appreciating about.
Yes,
the genetics is not a total discouragement. You can do a lot to prevent that from happening, even
Because
if you have both genes.
Because it's not necessarily going to be expressed. Just because you have it, it doesn't have to be expressed.
And that key word is expressed that you're highlighting here.
And so I learned that from this book, and I thought that was really cool.
We're not predestined totally by our genetic background.
Right. We're just more likely to have something happen. But not necessarily.
Well, maybe in the last 30 seconds for the first half, I will again remind our audience that Susan and I are talking about this book, The Aging Brain, by Dr. Timothy Jennings, and it's available at the Adventist Book Center. You're welcome to go there on South College Avenue to pick that up. And the subtitle is Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind. We'll be right back with Susan Logan after the break. I'm talking with Susan Logan, and we're talking about this book just recently published last year in 2018, The Aging Brain. And again, the subtitle, Proven Steps to Prevent Alzheimer's and to Sharpen Your Mind, or dementia. We're using AD in this discussion, Alzheimer's, dementia, in kind of a synonymous terms. Dr. Timothy Jennings is a psychiatrist, and with good reason to be interested in this subject due to, as we've discussed in the first half, his mother-in-law and his concern for her. Susan, you and I have both had family members that are involved with this. We could wish, by God's grace, to prevent that from happening to us. And so what was impressive about this book as he pursues preventing this topic?
Well, he talks a lot about things you can do so that your genes aren't activated in a way that will be detrimental to good aging. He says that we all age, everyone ages all the time, but dementia is not necessarily a part of aging. Sometimes it is, but all the research that he's done, he's pointed out areas that we can, how we can live and what we can eat and how we can act and what we can do that will help to prevent Alzheimer's, getting Alzheimer's. He talks about late stage Alzheimer's. There's early stage, like it comes in your 50s. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about late stage in the 70s and 80s, which is when most people get Alzheimer's. But a couple of the things really kind of jumped out at me. A lot of the things, the lifestyle things that he talks about are things that I've known for a long time and have practiced. But there are a few things that were kind of new to me. And so I thought I would like to share some of those.
Please, yeah.
One of them was talked about the way we cook our food. And I've always heard that fried food isn't good for you, that you shouldn't really have too much fried food. And I always thought that had to do with the oil, the high fat content in the oil. Well, he talks about what happens to the food while you're cooking it if it's fried, or if it's deep fried, or if it's seared or grilled. It produces something called AGE, Advanced Glycation End Product, and he abbreviates that as AGE, which is kind of interesting.
Appropriate for this topic.
Yeah.
It ages us, huh?
Yes, and you can get this age if you eat any of these foods that have been deep fried or caramelized, even like caramelized onions. And I love caramelized onions.
Oh, it's one of the most tastiest part of the process, isn't it?
It is, yes.
To bring the onions a little bit to the brown.
And
yes.
just in the last couple of years, I've developed this wonderful recipe. And so I said, caramelized onions? I was quite startled. I said, oh no, that can't be anything wrong with that.
My favorite recipe.
Yes. But I saw that, I read more in detail. That's on page 80 in this book, and talks about how that AGE, these advanced glycation end product, they abbreviates with AGE, is produced while you're cooking if you caramelize something, or if it's deep fried, or if it's seared. And your body just gets that in, and you absorb 30% of what you eat. Those kind of problems is AGE. And I thought, oh dear, so I shouldn't be eating any of that. And then he talks about how it is good to cook food. Use water, and if you use meat, to use low heat. Cook it over a longer period of time. Crock pot is really good. But I was a little startled with the caramelized onions.
I can tell. That's all right, Susan. We can minimize that exposure.
And then he
Only special occasions.
Yes. Then he goes on that it says the special. There's certain foods that you can eat that help clean up your system. Apples are one, broccoli, and there's a whole list of different vegetables and fruits that you can eat. I thought, well, that's really nice. They're all really, really good. And so that was kind of startling and distressing to me to find out something that I really love. It's not such a good thing.
I sense that this book is one of the ways that I summarized my thoughts about Tim's book is that if you ever have been wanting to go to like a complete health improvement project or a program, and you didn't have the money or you didn't have the time to invest, purchasing this book is like a complete health makeover. In other words, it's an examination. What I and you and I both would agree is that after every one of the 16 or 17 chapters in his book, he summarizes that whole chapter in bullet points,
Yes.
learning points that are like 3 or 4, some chapters maybe 5 or 6, learning points. And then the next page is action steps that go along with those learning points. So for the person that perhaps even doesn't even have the time to go page by page, there's a tremendous value in just hearing about the learning points and the action steps that take place. The whole book is organized with that.
It's very well organized, yes, very good. Another thing that kind of jumped out at me also was this idea that that it's good to fast, that fasting is really good for you. And I've heard this my whole life, and I've never been able to fast. I get lightheaded. I just feel terrible. I cannot fast. And I thought, well, I guess I can't do that. But he says that there's one really easy way to incorporate fasting into your everyday. If you go 12 hours between dinner and breakfast, that's a fast. And that will give your brain a chance to recover from it can get cleaned up, all the different things like the apples, for example, that you eat, and other things that you eat that help clean up your system. Will give them that time, and that's considered a fast. In fact, breakfast is breaking the fast.
The definition.
Yes.
Breaking the fast. I love that.
So if you go 12 hours every day between your last meal at night and your first meal in the morning, that's a fast. And that's very good. And I thought, oh, that's cool. Here I'm already fasting. I didn't even realize it.
That is encouraging.
So you don't have to go to 3 days or 5 days or whatever.
Yes, and be in
feel
sackcloth,
terrible. Right. It'd be miserable.
Or feeling like you are in sackcloth.
Right.
Like the Bible expresses it.
Yes. And all the bullet points that he gives. One thing, there's a couple of things that my husband and I have instituted since reading this book, because I read to him and I tell him about it. And one thing is, he says it's good to eat a handful of walnuts every day. And he talks about exactly why that's a good idea. And I would have to look and read that to you, but that's one of the bullet points and one of the things that is very, very healthy for your brain.
And you've incorporated that.
Yes, yeah. So now we have our handful of walnuts every day with our breakfast.
And this is, of course, you look at the end of the chapter or at the end of the book, and you find the study that tells you why.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's research that substantiates all the things that he's talking about.
Anything else that you've incorporated? I'm pleased to hear.
Yes, he talks about pomegranate juice. He really recommends that you have 8 ounces of pomegranate juice a day. And that stuff is really expensive. So we have, I get some, we have a little bit.
I have been impressed with the studies and the page that he devotes, a page and a half in this book about pomegranate juice as well. And that's one habit that I also incorporated after reading this book.
Is that right?
Yes. And fortunately, I have a friend that told me and this is pure pomegranate. This is not the sweetened. This is like if you take pomegranates and just squeeze out the juice. The only place that I have found to get it at a reasonable price as a grocery outlet.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, I'll have to check that out.
It's non-sweetened. It's just as it comes. And it has to be kept cool all the time. And so I thank my friend who, and I'm passing, since you're my friend, I'm passing that on to you. And now there'll be a big run.
Probably.
But that has been a tremendous blessing for incorporating some of those habits that you've indicated that are in the book.
Okay. Well, I'll check it out.
Another part in the book that I was taking zinc with a bit of copper in it. And when I read this book, that was the end of that. I literally threw that away. As a psychiatrist, and also he is a specialty in what to give the brain. If he says that I shouldn't have any copper or anything like that, or iron, he includes iron and copper in that, and without a doctor guiding you, I threw out that vitamin package that had copper in it. I mean, that's one of the things I did.
Oh, okay.
Anything else that you did after reading this book?
Yeah, we started taking a couple of things. One of these things I've never even heard of before. It's on page 218. Rhodiola rosea, RHODIOLA, and another word, ROSEA. It's a You can get it in a pill form. It's an antioxidant
Oh.
that he thinks is really excellent. You should take 150 to 600 milligrams a day. So I ordered some of that, and we're taking that. Because antioxidants are very good.
Yes, a big section on keeping our cells from turning like the apple turns when it's exposed to air. And I guess he parallels that with the body and keeping our cells from deteriorating. I'm just going to promote this book. I want to thank you for joining us today to talk about the Aging Brain book by Dr. Timothy Jennings. It's available at the ABC, and we just want to thank you. Thank you again, Susan, for joining us on Valley View Point, and thank you for joining us on Valley View Point. I'm Roger Johnson.